Nick, do you want to go and rip the 49ers?
No, I'm not ripping them. I want to give them credit.
That they're freeing up money for your guy.
Well, I don't think this is just for him. Reportedly, in that same article, Kawakami said both sides are being reasonable. He said neither side is trying to, be heavy-handed. I don't think Purdy's going to get $60 million. To answer your question, is the window closed? Is that the question? I don't think they enter next season like near the top of the Super Bowl contender list.
Not even favorites in their own division, I wouldn't think.
No, the Rams would probably get – I think, though, they'll be playoff contenders, and I think they'll have a good shot to make the playoffs. They obviously lost some guys. But Dre Greenlaw, I love Dre Greenlaw. Maybe they got a Super Bowl if Dre Greenlaw doesn't get hurt. But he's hurt he's missed basically half of the last 4 seasons, two, and then
Hufanga
some of the Debo is right. Hufanga's been hurt. I think he's missed. Yeah, he's been hurt the last 2 years for a lot of the games, and they got to draft well. They drafted well last year. I think they had 4 starters from last year, and this year they got a lot of picks. They're going to have to draft well. I think they'll settle in with Purdy. I think it'll be between that 45 and 50. Yeah. And I think they'll be fine. I mean, again, I don't think they're starting at the top next year, but I think they'll be playoff contenders.
Yeah, their window isn't closed, but it's definitely closing. Like, I've been on teams where we understood we had to strike because we had a period of time where we were going to all be together. Well, that's no longer the case for this group of guys, as we mentioned the names that are gone. But I think because of all these injuries – and what they didn't have last year. A lot of these guys that departed last year missed games, missed last year, basically. Yeah. So including a guy who they're going to rely heavily on in Christian McCaffrey. If he gets back to being the version of which we saw a couple years ago, and Purdy is that version of which we saw a couple years ago, this team will be just fine. I think they make the playoffs. I think they're good enough to make the playoffs. And a part of their makeup is not just the players, it's the coach, too. And adding Robert Saleh back on that sideline defensively is a big addition. But what Kyle is able to do is, and particularly within that division, when his guys are healthy, he's able to win a lot of games. So I believe that they'll be just fine. Their window isn't closed, but it's definitely closing.
With this group, it's closed. Not with necessarily this coach or this quarterback, but this core. And so Hubs just told me I hear they are the Vegas favorites in their division. I think that's a mistake. I think the Rams are a better team than them. And I think that they currently have $68 million in dead money on next year because of these moves they've made. So a team like that this year made a conference championship game, the Buffalo Bills. I think it would be ridiculous to ask Brock to do what Josh did, which is, hey, we're cleaning up the books this year. You're going to we're going to have holes on the roster. We're going to need you to carry us. He's not, in my eyes, that caliber of player, and I think that's not a. I don't think anyone should even view that as an indictment. There's only really a couple guys in the league that are that caliber or better than Josh Allen. It would be kind of ridiculous for this team not to have missed its window. They've been a A-list preseason Super Bowl favorite or second favorite 5 of the last 6 years, basically. They have been to 2 Super Bowls. They've been to 2 other conference championship games. 2 years ago, they pushed their chips to the middle of the table, and when they didn't want Bosa to hold out, so even though the top-paid defender in the league at that point in time made $29 million, he got $34 million a year. McCaffrey was awesome after his first year. When the top-paid running back in the league was at like $13 million, they gave him $19 million a year. Then last year, we're so close. Trent Williams is a 37-year-old tackle. They don't want him to miss games. They're like, fine, we'll guarantee you money for 2 more years. Brandon Ayuk, even though we paid Debo and drafted a wide receiver in round 1, fine, we'll give you top-of-the-market money. They did all these things to win right now, and they didn't win. And in their final year that they could have contended, everybody got hurt. I just think it would be ridiculous to think, oh, yeah, their running back's old for his position. Juszczyk was super valuable for what Kyle likes to do. He's gone. Debo was super. All their kind of chess piece type guys are gone, and a lot of their best players are old or coming off injury. Like, this is a reset moment for them.
I'm not.
Yeah. So, listen, I think the 49ers, I guess I take issue with this idea that, they didn't win. They were this top team for years, and they didn't win, and it was because of, their failures necessarily. Because I think that the years where they had their best chance to win, they either just went up against a better team like the Kansas City Chiefs in that moment. They had a harder Super Bowl to win, or they then were very unlucky with injuries. That Greenlaw injury was devastating in the Super Bowl. I know people don't like to talk about it, but it absolutely was devastating. I mean, absolutely. They were able to attack his replacement. And you're not going to tell me that a game that goes into overtime that doesn't matter. You're just not going to tell me that. And then the absurdity of the muff punt, these are all things that I actually had just talked about. So when you're talking about some of these tiny little finite things that happen, it's frustrating. And then this year when you have a chance to kind of run it back, everyone just gets injured. Literally everyone gets injured. You can always kind of take multiple approaches to this type of stuff, right? You can say, oh yeah, Greenlaw got injured or this or that, or they had Jimmy Garoppolo back in 2019, and if they just played better, they can win. There's always multiple ways to look at it, and there's also oftentimes multiple truths. Sometimes, like I always say, multiple things can be right, and other times I'm like, it has to be one or the other, and it's and part of the game is to try to figure out when you're applying which school of thought. When is something more practical, when is something more of the actual description of the truth more so. And to me, when you have a team like the 49ers who have been right there for years and years, when they're in their best chance, Jimmy Garoppolo does miss that throw. Like I said, in 23, they did have the unfortunate Christian McCaffrey fumble, muff punt, Greenlaw injury. It's just that little thing that just oh my gosh, if that doesn't happen, then things change. The Philadelphia Eagles, they lost in the Super Bowl in 22. And yes, Jalen Hurts fumbled. I don't blame that fumble for why they lost. But at the same time, you can say if he doesn't fumble, maybe they win. So if the Eagles didn't win this past year, we clearly know that they're more than capable of winning. We obviously, right? They literally won the Super Bowl. Yet they absolutely positively could have lost to the Rams. Absolutely. So it's just because you have an outcome doesn't automatically mean that it is a 100% indicator of the truth or the lack thereof. So I just hate of this kind of looking back on the 49ers as just kind of the decisions that they made, the acquisitions, the contracts, etc. It was all for naught. These were clearly the wrong decisions, and when it's not necessarily true. The Philadelphia Eagles paid Saquon Barkley a ton of money, not a ton of more money than most people thought that he should have gotten, and he was an older running back, as Nick obviously we know his highlights. And the Eagles could have lost to the Rams. Now people would have said, see, the Eagles went out and got, Saquon Barkley. That was great during the regular season. Wasn't enough, in the playoffs. What they really need is a better quarterback. You could easily write that narrative. And yet we know without a shadow of a doubt that narrative is not true because we saw them win. So it's just you got to be careful when you're constructing some of these narratives. And that is the tricky part about sports in general, is that again, on one side, like I say, sometimes the answer is very black and white, and it's it has to be this or that. Which is it? And other times they say, hey, there's multiple truths here. Multiple things can be true. And other times it's kind of just honestly, there's really no truth and there's really no, not truth. And it's just kind of however you want to view it. What lens do you want to view it? Half glass full, half glass empty. Just or glass half full, half empty. It's just kind of whatever your perception is kind of right. It's kind of sometimes the dirty little secret of sports talk is that kind of like no matter what you say, there's probably some truth to it technically. As long as you're not a constant hot take chaser, like, yeah, as long as you kind of talk semi-intelligently, like, you're probably technically not wrong. You might not be 100% right either. So again, it all depends on how you want to evaluate. And that's why I really encourage people to not look at it also through this binary lens of necessarily of like you either win or you don't. Again, sometimes that's relevant. But all I ask for teams that are supposed to be great and high level are like, are you consistently competitive? Are you getting to Super Bowls? Are you getting to NFC Championship games? 49ers, check and check. And then are you competitive in the Super Bowl? Why are you losing? Are you losing because you truly are coming up short? Is it the failure to execute, or you're just not good enough? Did you go up against a better team? What is the situation here? And when you look at the fine line, again, and I just made this video with the herd where it's like the 49ers had to go up against the Chiefs. And they lost. Compare that to the Rams. They got to go up against the Bengals, a clearly inferior team, clearly an inferior big game team as well. That's a luxury. That's a benefit. And yeah, the Eagles showed what you could do. They dominated. They were fully healthy. They were also fully healthy. They didn't have, sure, they had like a Nakobe Dean go down, but that's not equivalent to like Greenlaw going down, and it wasn't in the middle of the Super Bowl. So yeah, they were prepared. They were ready to go in that moment for sure. They built a team that was like, we are ready for revenge. But they had a down year too, though. That's the thing. And everybody was ready to bury them. In 23, everybody was ready to bury them. See, they going into 24, they were like, the Eagles are making bad mistakes. They're overpaying for Saquon. They're Nick had a whole thing where he was like, oh, the Eagles are paying for players that nobody wants anymore, that they're old past their prime. Jalen Hurts might get Carson Wentz. I mean, like, that was one of the big stories in the offseason. Jalen Hurts is going to be Carson Wentz. They're going to move on from him. And when you really think about it, that story was probably like in July, August, something around that timeline. Think about how it's like 4 or 5 months later, he's a Super Bowl MVP. So it's not always easy to see something in the immediate moment, especially when you have a down year. Especially when you have injuries or, bad coaching decisions, whatever it may be. Now they're making the right decisions. So this again, is San Fran's window closed? Is the wrong conversation to have. It's like if they had that same conversation about the Philadelphia Eagles. Because now they had to move on from a bunch of defensive players. They had to move on from some offensive players. Jason Kelsey's retiring. Cox is gone. Like all of these things. And you could have the conversation, is the window closed? And it's like, well, again, how are we defining this window? The Debo window? The Debo Kittle duo with Purdy and Shanahan window? Like with Juszczyk? Like what is the window? How are we actually defining the window? I think we're realizing and you're learning that when you're a well-run team, the window is more on the franchise as a whole rather than like these specific players. It's like, let's say the Philadelphia Eagles in 3 years from now, move on from A.J. Brown and Saquon's now moving on. Like, has the Philadelphia Eagles window closed? And it's, well, I don't know, they just drafted this awesome running back who's going to be great, and then they just signed, this free agent wide receiver who we don't even know exists yet, but they were able to just to pick him up, and, he's going to be, like, you understand what I'm saying? So it's just like, again, how are you defining the window? I do think the 49ers are in a, I think they're set up to take a step back. I, unfortunately, and this is, I try not to put this out there, and as someone who's, had a lot of injuries, as I always say, I do feel as though Christian McCaffrey, his body's failing on him. That's the unfortunate reality that I see. And I think we've continued to see signs of it, and I think his body is just absolutely failing on him. And it's hard for me to imagine that he's even 90% of what he was. It's hard for me to imagine that he's going to be able to play all of next year healthy and into the playoffs healthy. I just don't see it. And again, I want to be wrong. I want to be wrong 1,000%. I just don't see it. He's having these chronic degenerative issues that I just fail to see how they're going to be resolved. The best case scenario is them mitigating it. And now he's already had so much downtime because of his other injuries. And then he now gets like his I forget what it was, a patellar tear, whatever tear he had, whatever the injury was against the Bills. You're having more down. He's getting older. I just don't see it at this point. I see him just, not being, not to say that he's just going to be nothing, because I still think he's such a high level and a highly intelligent player that you'll still be able to find ways to utilize him. But Christian McCaffrey was the absolute workhorse and the engine of this offense. I fail to see how that's even remotely a possibility. And like I said, I really, really wholeheartedly hope I'm wrong. But just based off of how his body has progressed and what you're seeing, and all the injuries piling up and the lingering issues, and I just don't see it. So that's another thing that, the 49ers and Shanahan, they have to evolve past now. They have to kind of reinvent themselves. It's not just a rebuilding for the 49ers. It's figuring out, okay, what's the next evolution of this team, and how do we win? Because we knew what we needed to do and how to win games previously. How do we win now? The way how the Eagles won in 22 was not the same way how they won in 24. And they went to 2 Super Bowls and won the Super Bowl. So it's like, it's all this stuff is possible. And now they got Saleh, who I think is going to be massive for this defense. And I'm really excited to see what the 49ers do in that regard. And now it's going to just take a second. So, I'm excited to see it. But I think we're having the wrong conversation about, the 49ers window closed, et cetera, et cetera. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the 49ers? How do you feel about the moves that they're making? What direction do you think they're going in? Do you think the window has closed, however you want to define it? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions. Let's get in some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We're building an amazing community here, and I absolutely love to see you part of it. I want to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to, something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're well on our way to doing it. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much. See you next time.